एक साहित्यिक आयोजन का हिस्सा ज़रूर है, लेकिन व्यापक रूप से पूरे समाज को जो प्रभावित करता है और वो विषय आप जानते हैं, जिस रूप में उसे हमने इसमें शामिल किया है, भारत की सांस्कृतिक परंपराओं पर वैश्वीकरण का प्रभाव, इम्पैक्ट ऑफ ग्लोबलाइजेशन ऑन द कल्चरल ट्रेडिशंस ऑफ इंडिया। इस विषय को लेकर ये चर्चा होगी। ये साहित्योत्सव का जो हमारा आयोजन है उसका आखिरी दिन का या आखिरी यानी समापन सत्र है, बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है और आप सब इस सत्र का हिस्सा बने हैं, इसके लिए आप सबका आभारी और स्वागत अभिनंदन आप सभी का। इस सत्र में इसका सेशन को चेयर करने के लिए हमारे निवेदन को स्वीकार किया है साधना शंकर जी ने। उनका बहुत-बहुत आभार। मैं निवेदन करूँगा कि वो मंच पर आकर अपना स्थान ग्रहण करें। तालियों की आवाज़ आप सबकी तरफ से आनी चाहिए। Shadna Shankar ji is a very renowned author and civil servant also, and is an alumnus of SRCC Delhi, where she pursued her PhD in Syrian economic history. Ladies and gentlemen, आपकी 6 पुस्तकें प्रकाशित हो चुकी हैं, जिनमें नेवर अ डिस्कनेक्ट और असेंडेंस जो हैं प्रमुख और चर्चित रचनाओं में शामिल हैं। आपकी रचनाएँ राष्ट्रीय और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय अंग्रेजी समाचार पत्रों में और पत्रिकाओं में भी प्रकाशित होती रही हैं। इसके अलावा दैनिक भास्कर, लोकमत, द साउथ एशियन टाइम्स के लिए मासिक कॉलम भी आप लिखती हैं। आप पहले दूरदर्शन पर होस्ट, एंकर और एक्टर के रूप में आपकी भूमिका आप निभाती रही हैं, उसमें योगदान आपने दिया है। एंड करेंटली शी इज़ अ मेंबर ऑफ द नेशनल कंज्यूमर डिस्प्यूट्स रिड्रेसल कमीशन। सो साधना जी का अनुभव और व्यापकता उसकी जो है आज निश्चित रूप से इस विषय को एक नया आयाम देगी और इस सेशन को चेयर करने के लिए वो पधारी हैं, उनका बहुत-बहुत स्वागत अभिनंदन। इस सत्र में जो अन्य वक्ता होंगे जतिन नायक जी, उनको भी मैं आमंत्रित करता हूँ कि वो मंच पर आएँ और जितेंद्र कुमार नायक प्रख्यात ओडिया अंग्रेजी विद्वान और अनुवादक हैं, बहुत-बहुत स्वागत है आपका। आप 2016 में उत्कल विश्वविद्यालय में अंग्रेजी के प्रोफेसर पद से रिटायर हुए, सेवानिवृत्त हुए। आपका एक बहुत ही प्रख्यात और कालजयी उपन्यास जिसे कहा जाता है, ओडिया उपन्यासों में जिसका इस रूप में पहचान है और अंग्रेजी अनुवाद उसका कैलिफोर्निया विश्वविद्यालय प्रेस, ऑक्सफोर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी प्रेस और पेंगुइन बुक्स द्वारा उसे प्रकाशित किया गया था। आपने क्रिटिकल डिस्कोर्स ऑन ओडिया का अनिमेश महापात्र के साथ सह संपादन उसको को-एडिटिंग भी की है उसकी, जिसे 2022 में टेलर और फ्रांसिस यूके द्वारा उसे प्रकाशित किया गया। संप्रति यानी आजकल आप न्यू इंडिया फाउंडेशन बेंगलुरु में भाषा विशेषज्ञ के रूप में अपनी सेवाएं दे रही हैं। आपको कथा अनुवाद पुरस्कार और हच क्रॉसवर्ड बुक अवार्ड भी प्राप्त हो चुके हैं। इस सत्र में हमारे अगले वक्ता जो हैं, जो इसमें शामिल होंगे, उनका नाम मैं लेकर उन्हें आमंत्रित कर रहा हूँ, कुमार विक्रम जी। उनसे निवेदन है कि वो मंच पर आएँ और आपकी करतल ध्वनि के साथ उन्हें मंच पर हम आमंत्रित कर रहे हैं। आपको ये बताते हुए बहुत हमें खुशी होती है कि कुमार विक्रम जी द्विभाषी यानी बाइलिंगुअल कवि के रूप में, लेखक के रूप में, निबंधकार के रूप में, संपादक के रूप में और बुक डिप्लोमेट के रूप में भी उनकी पहचान है। और 3 पुस्तकों के आप लेखक हैं जिनमें शॉर्ट एसेज, टी.एस. एलियट एंड इंटेंसिव स्टडी ऑफ सिलेक्टेड पोएम्स और ये सह-लेखन, ये को-ऑथर के रूप में उनकी भूमिका इसमें रही है। और इसके अलावा एक और मेंस लिब एंड अदर लिटरेरी, कल्चरल एंड पर्सनल एसेज इस तरह की आपकी रचनाएँ रही हैं। संपादन और प्रकाशन के क्षेत्र में 25 से भी अधिक वर्षों का आपका अनुभव है और इस नाते आप भारत और विदेशों में पुस्तकों और उसके पढ़ने की जो संस्कृति है, उसके प्रचार और प्रसार में भी गहनता से जुड़े हुए हैं, उसमें अपना योगदान दे रहे हैं। और आजकल राष्ट्रीय पुस्तक न्यास जो नेशनल बुक ट्रस्ट है, उस भारत का, उसमें प्रमुख संपादक और संयुक्त निदेशक के रूप में अपनी सेवाएँ दे रहे हैं। बहुत-बहुत स्वागत कुमार विक्रम जी आपका इस आयोजन में, इस कार्यक्रम में। अगले हमारे इस पैनल में शामिल विभूति हैं नंदितेश निले जी, उनसे निवेदन करूँगा कि वो भी मंच पर आएँ। आपकी तालियों के साथ उनका भी मंच पर आगमन होगा, स्वागत स्वागत अभिनंदन। नंदितेश निले जी मानव मूल्यों के अधिवक्ता के रूप में जिनकी पहचान है और नेतृत्व यानी लीडरशिप ट्रेनर के रूप में उनकी पहचान है। लेखक, स्तंभकार, वक्ता, राजनीतिज्ञ, सामाजिक विश्लेषक और एक एंटरप्रेन्योर, एक उद्यमी के रूप में आपकी पहचान है। आप गांधी अध्ययन आईसीएसएसआर के डॉक्टरल फेलो रहे हैं और आपका एक कहानी संग्रह बीइंग गुड, आइए इंसान बने और उपन्यास क्यों भारत में पिछले 2 दशकों में जो सामाजिक आर्थिक परिवर्तन हुए हैं, उनकी अभिव्यक्ति बहुत सशक्त ढंग से उसमें हुई है। नीले जी का लक्ष्य भारत को एक अनमोल भारत बनाना है और इस दिशा में वो आगे बढ़ रहे हैं। तो भारत की समग्रता में उसको आज की परिस्थितियां में ग्लोबलाइजेशन की चुनौतियों के बीच में या उसके प्रभावों के बीच में उस उनका विश्लेषण भी महत्वपूर्ण होगा हम सबके लिए। एस कॉर्लोस जी, उन्हें आमंत्रित करूंगा मंच पर, प्लीज प्लीज कम एस कॉर्लोस जी. S. Carlos G is a former professor of Bangalore University and is a distinguished Tamil novelist and critic. His novel, Our Men in Warsaw, appeared in English, published by Niyogi Publishers. The translated version of his novel, Varsaval, in Kannada, received the Best Translated Novel Award from Karnataka Sahitya Academy in 2017. He has received Best Critic Award from MS University, Tirunelveli, and Best Novel Award from Literary Guardian, Canada. Mr. Carlos has taught in many universities, including Warsaw University, Poland, and Dravidian University. He was a member of the General Council of Sahitya Academy. We welcome Mr. S. Carlos in this panel, in this session. Thank you very much for joining us. Uh, सरोज शर्मा जी, मेरा ख्याल है वो जल्दी ही ज्वाइन करेंगे हमें, उनका, लेकिन इस बीच में समय का ध्यान रखते हुए हमने ये कोशिश की कि इस सत्र को हम इसकी शुरुआत कर सके, तो मैं निवेदन करूंगा इस सत्र की अध्यक्षता कर रहे साधना शंकर जी से कि वे अपने इंट्रोडक्टरी रिमार्क्स के साथ इस सत्र की शुरुआत करें.
थैंक यू सो मच. नमस्कार एवरीबॉडी. ये इस साहित्य सम्मेलन का आखिरी सत्र है, लेकिन आई होप ये वन ऑफ द मोस्ट इंटरेस्टिंग सत्र होगा, क्योंकि ये टॉपिक जो है थोड़ा साहित्य से हटके है मेरे हिसाब से. हाँ, और मैंने जब मुझे आया कि आपको इस सेशन में बोलना है या चेयर करना है, तो मुझे तो लगा कि मुझे फिर से वापस 1 साल बाद यूपीएससी के एग्जाम में बैठना है, क्योंकि दिस इज अ वेरी common a standard question in the UPSC exam. How has globalization impacted the in cultural traditions of India? So I must say it's very interesting कि एक लिटरेरी समारोह में इस तरह का डिस्कशन हो रहा है. और हमारा जो पैनल है, आपने सबके इंट्रोडक्शन सुने. So we have an eclectic panel. People come from different walks of life. There are academicians, there are columnists, there's somebody handling National Book Trust, and and somebody who's specializing in ethics and values in our society. So I think it should be an interesting kind of 1 hour for all of us sitting here. I don't want to, speak first or about what I felt or what I had thought I will speak. I'll sum up what everybody else says at the end of the program, because it is much better that you hear the participants at this point of time. So I really don't know what is the order of priority or seniority, but I thought that on this topic, let us open with somebody who's a pure academician. Of course, he's a writer, but who spent his life teaching English literature. He's part of the academic world. And what are his views on, how globalization has impacted or impacted Indian cultural traditions? So I'll first invite Mr. Jatin Naik to please speak. And keeping the time, I'd request all the speakers to please keep about your speech about 10 minutes to 15 minutes maximum, so that everybody gets a fair chance to address the audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Esteemed chairperson, dignitaries on the dais, and ladies and gentlemen. I may take even less than 10 minutes. So, this is a very vast subject, and I thought I can't do justice to it if I go on talking about all aspects of it. So I thought I would single out only one aspect, that's language. The way globalization has impacted cultural traditions in terms of its impact on language. So, by globalization, we generally mean a process whereby the global tends to devalue the local. That's not the only definition, but generally speaking, this is what has happened. And yet, life everywhere is lived locally. If the local is emptied of vibrant specificity and sources of identity, a vacuum is created may be filled with boredom and violence. The impact of globalization on traditional Indian culture is increasingly felt in terms of standardization of forms of cultural expression. This particularly uh, this is particularly evident in the erosion of so-called regional languages, which conceal a deeper erosion of unique cultural practices, which gave shape and meaning to millions of lives. Under colonial rule, Indian languages faced a challenge from the dominant status of English. But this led to creative, often very fruitful negotiations with indigenous languages. Far from marginalizing or destroying regional languages, English infused them with a new vitality. Brilliantly bilingual intellectuals and writers began interve- introducing new literary forms like the sonnet, the essay, the novel, autobiographies, travelogues into their own literary traditions. New ideas from the West were absorbed, challenged, and modified by writers who expressed themselves in their mother tongues. Prose, as an instrument of discussing, debating, elaborating these new ideas, was brought to supreme application. But under conditions of globalization, things seem to have radically changed. As far as the situation relating to the Indian languages is concerned, in many instances, they face the possibility of erosion and even extinction. While, while still vibrant as languages of entertainment, they are increasingly neglected as languages in which knowledge can be created and disseminated. Think of the time when the anti-colonial freedom struggle had gathered momentum. Monumental projects involving compilation of encyclopedias written in Indian languages were undertaken. One of the early initiatives in this direction was N.N. Bosu's Bangla Vishwakosh. Mahatma Gandhi was so impressed with this effort that he paid a visit to Bosu in Kolkata when he had fallen ill. This encyclopedic project was part of a larger initiative which sought to prove that Indian languages can be effectively employed as vehicles of knowledge. Inspired by this, a Gandhian in Odisha undertook the task of compiling an 80-volume encyclopedia after independence. Similar projects were taken up at Madras University and was led again by a Gandhian school teacher. But the tide seems to have turned. Indian languages as medium of instruction in higher education institutions, um, even in schools, seem to fight a losing battle, and English holds unchallenged sway. The link, which is supposed to help Indian languages communicate with each other, has replaced the chain, has it, as it were, become the chain. This has a disturbing, far-reaching cultural consequence. Another factor contributed to the Another factor has contributed to the erosion of Indian languages and the emergence of English as a dominant lingua franca of the country. During the Cold War, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, rival power blocs headed by the USA and the Soviet Union tried to win the hearts and minds of people in recently decolonized countries in Asia and Africa by the books published in English, Russian, by getting the books published in English and Russian into languages of these countries. Translation was seen in those days as a powerful means of shaping political outlooks of readers in India and elsewhere. Soon, however, the emphasis shifted to promoting English and patronizing an English speaking elite in these countries. Uh, the USA and the UK achieved this objective by setting up institutions which worked tirelessly to train and equip the elites. The British Council and the USIS and the UCP played pivotal roles in furthering this project. American Studies Research Center actively encouraged academic institutions to introduce courses in American literature, which gained immense popularity for it received financial and other kinds of support. The funding of CIFL, the founding of CIFL, now FLU, provided institutional support for the teaching of English as a second language. One could say now diphthong became one's destiny. As far as the translation of books written in Russian into regional languages was concerned, the program didn't achieve spectacular success. Ironically, the easy availability of Russian classics and scientific texts in English translation enjoyed immense popularity and contributed to the growing popularity of English as a language of knowledge. The emerging elite, far from trying to infuse new energy and vitality into their own literature, proceeded to write in English and sought to enrich literature in English. Many of them chose to live in the UK and the USA, and themes of exile, displacement, the search for identity uh, in, in an alien world came to dominate the literary landscape. Many of them, when asked why they chose to write in English, not in their mother tongue, replied that English chose them. They didn't choose it. Thank God, English was busy doing something else when Gitanjali Sri or Vinod Shukla wrote their novels in Hindi. The erosion of linguistic diversity is one of the most visible impact of globalization on Indian cultural traditions. But the outlook is not very bleak. The world outside is beginning to take a deeper interest in literature produced in Indian languages. But the problem is, works written in these languages have to be translated into English before they could receive the attention of the reading public residing elsewhere. But this indicates at least a shift of attitude and emphasis, but more remains to be done if we seek to counter the negative impact of globalization on Indian cultural traditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Naik. You have highlighted the, I would say, slightly negative impact, and as you say, the erosion of Indian languages due to the impact of English. So, but in your speech, you also highlighted the fact that things are changing, and I would say that both technology and uh, access to translation are changing the interest and the vital, at least reviving in some ways the interest in Indian languages. So we should keep our hope alive. Now, the next speaker that I'm going to invite is somebody who talks on values and ethics, and mostly values and ethics are at one level pretty universal. So I'm very keen to hear what Mr. Uh, Nilay, has to say about the impact of globalization on Indian cultural traditions, and I hope he'll be speaking about ethics and values. Please.
So first, namaste, आप सभी को. Thank you, Sadhana ma'am. Thank you so much. The I was counting that around 40 people we are sitting here. और शहरों में शाम तो होती नहीं, ट्रैफिक आती है. I know that very soon people will start leaving also. So while I was coming, I met globalization. मेरी मुलाकात globalization से हुई. And there are a lot of people surrounding the globalization, and on one side, culture and tradition, on the cornered, looking lean, outcast, and just being mesmerized कि इस globalization के पास है क्या. So I put myself with all kind of courage, सारे साहस के साथ मैं globalization के पास पहुंचा और कहा कि आप ही की चर्चा करने जा रहा हूं मैं. तो हंस पड़ा, बोला हमारी चर्चा आप क्या कर लेंगे, कुछ हमारे बारे में उल्टा सीधा बोलेंगे बट नथिंग विल हैपन, होगा कुछ भी नहीं. मैंने कहा इतनी अकड़ में ना बोला करो. बोला करे मैं क्या अकड़ में बोलूंगा. यू हैव सीन व्हेन द जेलेंस्की मेट द प्रेसिडेंट ट्रम्प. Trump was not capable to see someone who is heading a country, but he saw the dress code. What should be the dress code? And he was knowing there is another person who is a capitalist who roams in his kingdom with his t-shirt, with his son. जहां पूंजी का खेल होता है, वहां सारे नियम बदल जाते हैं। ग्लोबलाइजेशन ने मुझे कहा और समझाया कि निलय साहब, ये एथिक्स और वैल्यूज की ज्यादा चर्चा ना करो, ये आदर्शवादी बातों की ज्यादा चर्चा ना करो। बात करनी है तो पूंजी की करो। इट्स द कैपिटल विच यूनाइट एवरीवन। It's the universal language of the globe, Nilay. The moment you will talk honesty, integrity, values, ethics, these all things are mundane and it will be thrown in the dustbin. I look towards the culture and tradition. उनको लगा कि निलय साहब हार रहे हैं, वो घबराए। मैंने उनको इशारा किया। मैंने ग्लोबलाइजेशन से पूछा कि एक बात बताऊं तुम्हें, तुम किंडल का दाम क्यों नहीं बढ़ा देते? फोन के दाम बढ़ गए, सभी चीज के दाम बढ़ गए। तुम में दम हो तो किंडल का दाम भी बढ़ा दो। ये किंडल 13,000 से 17,000 पे क्यों घूम रहा है इतने सालों से? उसे भी 50,000 का होना चाहिए था, क्योंकि वो 1 लाख किताबें अपने साथ रख सकता है। ग्लोबलाइजेशन ने सर झुका दिया, कुछ नहीं कहा। उसने मुझसे पूछा और क्या कहना चाहते हो बताओ। मैंने कहा 12 मार्च को ही गांधी ने दुनिया को बताया था कि इट्स द वॉक एंड द वॉक शुड बिलीव दैट इज द नॉन वॉयलेंस दैट कैन ओनली वर्क। आप बताओ ग्लोबलाइजेशन, इस दुनिया को कोविड में नॉन वॉयलेंस ने बचाया, न्यूक्लियर बॉम्ब ने बचाया, कि वैक्सीन ने बचाया? बताओ। हाउ द वर्ल्ड वाज सेव्ड व्हेन इट वाज इन क्राइसिस ग्लोबलाइजेशन। तुम्हारे पास इतनी अकड़ है तो अपनी अकड़ से बताओ मुझे कि द वर्ल्ड वाज सेव्ड बाय केमिस्ट्री और द वर्ल्ड वाज सेव्ड बाय ह्यूमन वैल्यूज। देयर वाज अ डॉक्टर हु वाज इन द हॉस्पिटल, देयर वाज अ ग्रोसरी पर्सन हु यूज्ड टू कम टू माय होम, देयर वाज समवन जो रोड पे लॉ एंड ऑर्डर देखता था, कोई कलेक्टर था जो कलेक्टेरिएट में बैठा हुआ था। तुम बताओ ग्लोबलाइजेशन, सबको मरने का डर था, सबने मास्क पहना था, लेकिन कोई किसी को जिंदा रखना चाहता था। कितना दम था तुमने, क्यों नहीं तुमने दुनिया में से मनुष्य को हटा दिया? क्योंकि तुम्हारी जीत ये है ग्लोबलाइजेशन कि यू हैव मेड पर्सन ए प्रोडक्ट। मनुष्य वस्तु बन गया और वस्तु मनुष्य। इस पूरे डिस्कोर्स में इफ देयर इज एन एथिकल कोनोटेशन इज कि पूरी जद्दोजहद इस बात की है कि मनुष्य को मनुष्य कैसे समझा जाए। हाउ ए मैन शुड बी ट्रीटेड लाइक ए मैन। घर में पापा ये सोचते हैं कि माई सन विल आस्क फ्रॉम मी, और अब सन दूसरे कमरे से एसएमएस कर देता है, हाउ आर यू पापा। काम खत्म। ग्लोबलाइजेशन तुम्हें ताकत तो बहुत है कि पूरी दुनिया को तुमने फ्लैट कर दिया। तुम में ये भी ताकत है कि सबके इंसान से, सारे इंसान को ह्यूमन वैल्यू से निकाल के एक ब्रांड वैल्यू दे दिया और लोगों को बताया कि इंसान की कीमत उसके गुच्ची बैग से होती है, इंसान की कीमत उसके एप्पल फोन से होती है, इंसान की कीमत उससे नहीं जिस गाड़ी से वो निकलता है उससे होती है। तुमने सब कुछ किया ग्लोबलाइजेशन। तुम भी यकीन करो, बहुत कुछ टूटा इस संसार में। परिवार टूटे, the impact, it has happened. Family have been broken into pieces. Most important part globalization, values और ethics को एक आदर्शवादी यूटोपियन जामा पहना दिया गया। ये आदर्शवादी बातें मत करिए निलय साहब, कुछ व्यवहारिक बातें करिए। किताबें लिखी गई ये सोच कर कि किताबें बिकेंगी कितने, सब कुछ छूटा ग्लोबलाइजेशन। लेकिन एक बात तुम बताना कि जब तुम्हारा भी अंत समय आएगा तो तुम्हें कौन बचाएगा? तो बोला, मेरा अंत कैसे आएगा सर? उसने पूछा मेरे से कि हाउ माई लास्ट विल कम। तो मैंने कहा कि तुम्हारा लास्ट ऐसे आएगा ग्लोबलाइजेशन कि इस प्लेनेट पे आखिर इंसान को रहना पड़ेगा। देयर इज नो अदर वे। यू नीड। आपने एआई बना दिया, आपने पूरी दुनिया को टेक्नोलॉजी से समेट के रख दिया, लेकिन मैं ये जानना चाहता हूं, जब मेरा बेटा स्कूल जाता है, मैं इस बात से चिंतित रहता हूं कि उसे चोट न लग जाए। मैं चाहता हूं कि कोई एक ऐसी टीचर हो जो उसका ख्याल रखे। मैं चाहता हूं कि क्लास का सबसे साहसी बच्चा उसका दोस्त बने। मैं चाहता हूं कि प्रिंसिपल ऐसे हो जो मेरे बच्चे को मोटिवेट करके बता सकें कि वो अपनी मन की बात कह सके। मैं चाहता हूं कि मेरा बच्चा टेलीफोन से डिजिटल दुनिया से निकल के प्रकृति की दुनिया में जाए, जो तुम इतने कार्बन एमिशन की बात करते हो ग्लोबलाइजेशन। जब हम रहेंगे ही नहीं तो तुम कैसे बचोगे? एंड नाउ दैट्स द पॉइंट। ग्लोबलाइजेशन ने भीड़ को हटाया, बोला अरे नीले साहब इधर आओ, कॉफी वॉफी पियोगे तो बताओ, साहित्य अकेडमी जा रहे हो, कुछ मिलेगा मिलेगा नहीं, पहले ही बता रहा हूँ। मैंने कहा कॉफी वॉफी नहीं पीना। अरे यार ये क्या कह दिया तुमने, जब मैं ही मनुष्य ही नहीं रहेगा तो मैं क्या करूंगा? तो मैंने कहा कि मनुष्य को तुमने सेलर बना दिया ग्लोबलाइजेशन, मनुष्य को तुमने बायर भी बना दिया। कोशिश करना कि ऐसे सेशंस होते रहें कि शायद मनुष्य भी इंसान बन पाए। थैंक यू एवरीवन, थैंक यू।
Thank you so much, Nileji. See, I said no, that although this is the last session, it's going to be full of energy and full of very, very interesting thoughts. So now I'm actually from each speaker, I'm noting down what is their vision of globalization. And I'll sum up with all the various definitions of globalization that have come out amongst the speakers to give us an idea what the general definition of globalization is the interconnectedness of economies, societies, and cultures. But if you will listen carefully to each speaker, there is some aspect or something of globalization which for them defines globalization, which I think is the most interesting part that is coming out in this session. Next, I'll invite our colleague from the South to give you a different dimension, Mr. Carlos, who's himself a writer, to come and share his views on our very interesting topic.
Friends, the word globalization, it is rightly pointed out by the first speaker that globalization is understood in its relation to the local. So there was a technical term, localization. Globe and the local are linked together. In this context, I would like to refer the name of Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. She has contributed much in this sphere. She calls globalization as a textuality. Globalization has nothing to do only with economic aspect of it. It has a textual link. So what is a textuality? A text has a link with a space. This is her understanding. That means, the wall has a link with the air. In one of the sessions today, they were talking about IT and literary creativity. So the concepts are rendered very loose. So globalization is linked with postmodernity. Postmodernity and post-coloniality. So there is no particular separated concept as globalization. It is linked with our countries, our culture, and culture is expanded as literary culture. So, as a person who has been practicing theory in the Tamil context, I would like to tell our audience that we have been understanding one of our very ancient grammar called Tolkappiyam. Tolkappiyam has three parts. First is phonology, second is syntax, third is poetics, unlike Ashtatyai, Panini's book. So, what we have been doing in our Tamil context is linking the basic element of a sound with imagination. So, what Gayatri is doing, we do it in a very different way in the context of Tamil theory. This is the first section. Unlike Aristotle, who talks about poetics, free way of concentrating on tragedy and comedy, Tolkappiyar covers language, syntax or sentence, and then poetics in the third part. So, the signifier, to use a technical term of Sasur, so the signifier has a link with the signified. So Gayatri is enabling us to understand these things, taking examples from our particular uh, culture, that is Tamil. So in her an aesthetic education in the era of globalization, it's a very important book. Aesthetic and globalization are linked here. Then she expands textuality into some material object. She coins a new word, worlding. Then another word, double bind. Body and soul, two binary opposites. These two are linked together, and she calls it a double bind. So, just like these AI people are going for very abstract thoughts, conceptualization is made very abstract in understanding globalization. So, uh, this textualizing or worlding or double bind, through that we come to understand globalization as a literary concept or literature as a globalized concept. In this context, I would like to, some of you may be aware that Laetor's grand narrative, again a textuality. So what is rendered here is a very material one being interpreted as a very non-material text. So uh, now this is the first part of my article. I will be brief. The second part is making use of these abstract concepts. I would like to point out certain things that are happening in our regional languages. The English publishers are entering into the industry of publications, and as far as Kannada, I know Malayalam, and I know Tamil. All these southern languages, how literature is understood is we give a period of 50 years. Through the 50 years, literature is being developed in a particular way. In Kannada, it is developed in a particular way. For example, the origin and growth of novels, the compared to the origin and growth of novels in Tamil, both are very different. Now, what is happening is the English publishers linked with other corporate publications, they come to the regional language and they take a particular text and make it very important. So all of a sudden, the review comes in New York Times. So globalization, textuality, and at the same time, a kind of corporate business, all these things get mixed up. So the traditional understanding of literature being developed in a very particular, unique way in the regional languages are somehow tarnished. So we have to wait and see what is going to happen in future for Indian literature, particularly in the regional languages. Thank you. I'm able to put across certain things, making use of certain internationally accepted scholars linked with our regional languages, how they are taken up and concepts are developed in the context of traditional grammar, literature, genres like novel, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Carlos. I must say that was a very erudite and scientific way of trying to delineate uh, the when you said textuality. Somehow, if I'm what my understanding from your thing was that you're saying globalization also has a context in which it has to be seen. There is a context in which it grows, and drawing from that, I would say that if we agree with the idea that globalization has a context, then how it organically grows in every culture and every society in some ways tends to be different. So its impact also tends to be different. That's just a thought from his speech. Thank you so much. And I think Saroj Sharma ji has not joined us. So now I have the privilege to invite our last speaker on the topic, Mr. Kumar Vikram. Please.
Respected Chairperson, my fellow panelists, august audience. Of course, first I would like to thank Sahitya Academy for inviting me to this grand uh, festival of literature and letters, as they say, they have organized. The topic is impact of globalization on cultural traditions of India. Of course, the topic is quite wide-ranging. There are three important aspects. One is globalization as such, cultural traditions, and then, of course, impact. Uh, I would just like to, instead of, I would say, instead of complaining about globalization, I would like to focus on the impact part, the dilemmas which it provides to us, how we are negotiating in certain sense, because it is something which has a big historical context and something beyond our control. So, as societies and as nations and as communities, as families, as individuals, we have to find a way to handle it, way to respond to it. Uh, First of all, I think generally when we talk about globalization, this is in order to emphasize that if you look at the march of the human civilization, it is not that there was no global interactions and no global connections. In fact, the entire human civilization has marched, broadly speaking, on the two pillars of trade on one side and culture on the other side. Under culture, we can the whole lot of things that literature, language, and even religion, customs, all those things can come. Trade is the entire commerce part of it. And trade and culture used to be kind of a uh, global, that they used to provide global connections during quote unquote peace time, because there would be a third element, which would be generally invisible, but it will come out in full force, that is the political power. So there would be expansions, there would be, invasions, there would be, uh, the kings and emperors with their imperialistic ambitions, much before the colonial powers came into being. India is, we know our history, and it is sometimes we are mostly talking about the invasions or the things which came from outside. It will also do good for us to point out that there were kings and there were emperors who were also expansionists in their sense. In Karhana's Raj Tarangini, there's a major king who reaches up to Uzbekistan, and there is Voltaire Maurya period, which reaches up to Afghanistan on one side, and of course we have Cholas who reached up to the southeast, Indonesia, Singapore. So we also have had kings who expanded themselves. But the globalization, I believe, as far as this topic is concerned and what we are trying to figure out, we are talking about globalization, which is maybe after the World War II, which the globalization has come up. And for us, in the last 3 decades, 4 decades, with full force, along with the economic liberalization and everything. I would say that let's give it a historic context, that there was rise of European nationalism, and colonialism, their colonialism was actually an expansion of their nationalism, their nationalist ambitions, which brought them through their, you know, invading through, sometimes through trade and sometimes actual invasion. So colonialism was the extension of European nationalism. It was their, I would say, the dark side of nationalism of European in the European context. And then there was resilience from the colonized societies, like in India, we had our full freedom struggle, independence movement, and they had to retreat uh, at a particular point in history. And our independence movement was not only about a political struggle. We all know that each and every leader also talked about the Indianization of languages. There were nationalist movements in languages, in cultures, in what you say, other cultural traditions, theater. Everything was focused to make it Indian. To make it something. We need to escape from the impact of the European society, especially England, who ruled over us. And there was this whole movement. And after independence, there was this whole movement of this cultural thing also getting converted into our economy. We started building trade and industries. We were trying to become self-reliant in every sense. So after World War II, there was a Cold War, and the people, the societies, or the nations, once they are empowered historically, they will always try to, show their power and be, uh, you know, so that's why the concept of, I would say, globalization, without raising a war, when you try to expand your own nationalistic ambitions through economy, through wider integration of economy, and with that comes the culture. So I would say that uh, the decolonization process with the colonial societies started, and the post-colonialism, as we say, it globalization came as a anti-narrative to that. So maybe as independent society, India and other nations would have thought that now we have won the battle and we are stable. Now we can look after our society and our needs. But there was this another surge, another impact, another, in a sense, quote unquote, one can say, invasion. I would like to, having said this, I would like to emphasize on only one particular aspect, that how it has changed our worldview and how we are trying to deal with it. Just say the impact which it is has on our tradition, the family tradition of joint family system. Now, globalization, if you read, I have got a definition from the Merriam Webster encyclopedia. I'll just read the two lines, that the process by which the experience of everyday life, marked by the diffusion of commodities and ideas. So, it's very important. Commodities and ideas is becoming standardized around the world. And the factors that have contributed to globalization include increasingly sophisticated communications and transportation technologies and service, mass migration, and the movement of peoples. So, this migration and the movement of people with industrialization, with urbanization, people coming to cities, and this joint family structure breaking, nuclear families coming up. But I don't think we need to completely bemoan this fact, because we leave out one very important aspect of joint family structure. And I don't want to be controversial. I mean, we are thinking aloud. We can think about it. That joint family structure was actually sustained by the women folk, by the efforts of the women folk. The entire joint family structure got sustained with this new ideas, with the migration, with women getting education and getting financial independence. The identity of women, the talk about the identity of women, the entire women discourse has come up. So there are actually two sides. One, I consider it a positive impact, where women has got their own identity. I wouldn't say that uh, uh, in joint family women had no identity, but that that I would say that pronounced sense of understanding is more in the nuclear families. But at the same time, there is a flip side. The flip side is that a part of the women folk may be becoming independent, but due to globalization, due to the market forces, due to these quote unquote liberalized ideas, there is also objectification of women. So it is creating a tension where we need to, weigh what are the uh, advantages and what are the disadvantages. There is another side to globalization, which is a people who get displaced from villages, they make a mark in the cities, but they are always talking about their rootlessness. They're always talking about what has been left behind. And there is a angst, there is a guilt as if, which is reflected in poetry, in art, in theaters. But at the same time, I would say, but the people who have been left behind, and there are a large number of people who are left behind because of the economic reasons, their aspirations are different. They do not want this kind of romanticization of a life which is being lived in the smaller towns and in villages, because it is not the life which they may be enjoying, because the resources are less, the opportunities are less, so they want to go out of this the setting in which they are placed. So the only I would say the only dilemma which is there in the globalization, that we say globalization, but actually it means westernization. That's the problem. It is not that the entire global community is interacting with each other, contributing to each other's growth, then there is no problem. Because what is the problem if my ideas and my trade also flourishes due to this globalization? But if it means the flourishing of the ideas of the West only and their trade as well and the culture, then you call it globalization, but it is not globalization in true sense. I would conclude just by saying, because there is very interesting thing is happening in USA. There is a they have discontinued. The new administration has discontinued the U.S. aid funds. The U.S. aid funds, it has been the post-colonial thinkers like Edward Said. He has written a lot on how U.S. aid funds are used to push the cultural ideas of the USA. But what does it mean that by discontinuing it, this government wouldn't want to push their ideas? No, because the times have changed. They have taken over the entire technological world. They don't need this kind of fund. So the entire, the social media space, which is controlled by them actually, where the narratives are created, is owned by them. So I I would just like to now conclude and say that uh, we need to, as a society and as individual and as families, we need to somehow find that uh, Buddha's middle path, that golden mean, which everybody would figure out for himself or herself at individual level, and that is how one can negotiate, and maybe one can survive in these times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vikram. I think in a way, my decision to call you last really worked, because you kind of summed up all the thoughts that were individually kind of expressed. So in this session, we've actually traversed quite a distance about how each one of us on this panel thinks about globalization. We started with Mr. Nayak saying that globalization devalues localization. That was his primary idea on globalization. While Mr. Nilay, when he highlighted the fact that globalization has made the human being uh, as a product. It has, kind of identified, if there's a word like that, the human being itself. While Mr. Carlos spoke about the context of globalization, the textuality, let me not use your context, let me use your word, the textuality of globalization. And he pointed out that globalization is a product of postmodernism and post-colonialism. And Mr. Vikram has carried it on, given us a historical perspective. And in his whole discourse, what I found the most catchy word or the most interesting thought was about negotiating globalization. I think all of us sitting in this room and on the panel accept, we cannot deny the fact that globalization, westernization, or anything that you want to call it, that the, the idea has impacted our lives in so many ways. We have, because we are sitting in Sahitya Academy, the focus has been on language and literature. But just look at the food we eat. Momos, pizzas, burgers. The world's food is now on our table. Our plates have changed. Even our business traditions. When I tend to not leave out business tradition from culture, because business also has a cultural tradition. Business models of business have changed. This whole idea of startup, the whole idea of online technology is pushing it. As Mr. Vikram very interestingly pointed out, USA can afford to shut down because now the tech is taking over the idea of pushing, the whole idea dominance of the developed world. So online, I mean, all of us now have stopped going to our neighborhood retailer and we all shop online. So all our lives are impacted. And I'd go back to what Mr. Nilay said, that he said in his very interesting, talk. He dramatized it. It's meeting globalization, and he asked globalization, "What will happen to you when you end?" And of course, he highlighted the idea that human beings are important and they will outlast any such trend. But but I feel somehow that changes that take place once, they tend to carry on for a very long time. So even if this kind of wave of, say, globalization or ideas and economies and merging and interconnecting changes in some manner, the changes that have taken place may not go away so quickly. And I personally don't feel the need to bemoan anything. I think change is the only reality in life, and we have to negotiate it and learn to live with it. That is what I would like to say on this whole debate of globalization's impact on our cultural traditions. That we have to, and that I think was the hopeful point that Mr. Vikram also highlighted. Then we all have to negotiate it to the best of our abilities and move along. So I hope you all enjoyed. I don't know if there is a practice in Sahitya Academy of taking any questions, but since we have time, anybody has a question, we can take 2 questions, but only questions, huh? No long comments. Address it to the speaker you want to ask and ask a question. I don't want comments from the audience. Okay, come. Okay, okay. Introduce yourself, please.
My name is Suresh. Germany has established Goethe Institutes. Spain has established Cervantes Institutes, and China has established Confucius Institutes in many countries around the world. Could the union government establishing Vyasa Institutes help in coordinating the Indian cultural activities abroad?
Can I take this? Um, I wouldn't say that there's a name of an institute by name of any Vyasa Institute, but let me inform you that in all major countries, the Ministry of External Affairs runs cultural centers. Any major country that you go to, or where we have a big diaspora presence, we have, apart from the embassies, there are cultural centers which teach Indian dance, Indian languages, yoga, they all exist.
I was referring to the consistency in the branding and messaging. For example, in London, there is the Nehru Center. In Berlin,
You
there is
might, no,
the.
no. I don't think you should bring out any deficiency in any individual institution where you have had this thing. And we are not one place where we can have a consistency on one thing. Depending, we have to also cater to our diaspora that lives in those countries. So the programs might be different, but yes, Ministry of External Affairs promotes Indian culture on a consistent, regular basis. I would like us to leave it there. I'm not going to discuss any individual institution. Please. Any other question? I don't think so. Thank you so much. Even at the end of the day, there are so many people in this hall. I think we are all very grateful for that. Thank you very much. Thank you for the panelists also. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sanya ji, for sharing the session or sharing your views also. साहित्य उत्सव का ये अंतिम सत्र है और उसका समापन हुआ है और इस समय चाहे वो गंगा सभागार में या सभागार के बाहर जो सिचुएशन है, जो परिस्थितियां हैं कि कमर बांधे हुए चलने को यहाँ सब यार बैठे हैं, बहुत आगे गए, बाकी जो हैं वो तैयार बैठे हैं। तो इसलिए अब ये समय बिल्कुल नहीं है कि कुछ और कहा जाए, लेकिन हाँ, ये ज़रूर है कि साहित्य अकादमी की तरफ से दिव्य सज्जनों, ये 7 तारीख से लेकर आज तक का ये आयोजन, जिसमें देश भर के 700 से भी ज़्यादा नामचीन साहित्यकार, बहुत ही प्रतिष्ठित साहित्यकार इसमें शामिल हुए, साहित्य साधक इसमें शामिल हुए, साहित्य रसिक बड़ी संख्या में इसमें आए। इतने सारे भाषाओं और बोलियों में, 50 से भी ज़्यादा भाषाएँ और बोलियों में ये सारी सहभागिता और प्रतिभागिता रही है। और इतने बड़े आयाम पर, व्यापक स्तर पर विभिन्न आयामों को सिर्फ साहित्य नहीं, बल्कि साहित्य के साथ जुड़ी हुई पूरा जो हमारा सामाजिक सांस्कृतिक परिवेश है, उन सबको समाहित करते हुए इतने सारे सत्र आयोजित हुए हैं। और उसमें आप सब ऐसी तन्मयता के साथ, एकाग्रता के साथ और स्नेह के साथ, अपनत्व के साथ उसमें शामिल हुए। आप सबका साहित्य अकादमी की तरफ से बहुत-बहुत हृदय से आभार, सबके लिए बहुत सारी मंगल कामनाएँ, साहित्य के प्रति, समाज के प्रति, संस्कृति के प्रति और देश के प्रति, क्योंकि वो राष्ट्र हम सबके लिए महत्वपूर्ण है। उन सबके प्रति हमारी ये प्रतिबद्धता, हमारा समर्पण उसी रूप में साहित्य के माध्यम से आगे बढ़े। आभार साधना जी का, बहुत-बहुत आभार जतिन नायक जी, कुमार विक्रम जी, नंदितेश निलय जी, मिस्टर एस कार्लोस, इन सबका आभार, आप सबका भी बहुत-बहुत आभार। Yes, we will have a group photograph of the panelists here. This is the last. एक बार सबके लिए शुभकामनाएं आपकी जरूर होनी चाहिए, आपकी तालियों के रूप में और आपके अपने लिए भी। साहित्य अकादमी हृदय से आभारी है आप सबके लिए। हमने प्रयास किया है कि आपके इस प्रवास को जो इन दिनों में आप इस कार्यक्रम के साथ जुड़कर रहे, उसे सुखद भी हम बनाएं, उसे एक ऐसा अनुभव बनाएं, क्योंकि आप जहां भी जाएंगे, समाज के जिस हिस्से में भी, देश के जिस कोने में भी, आप ही वो प्रबुद्ध एम्बेसडर्स हैं, दूत हैं, जिनके माध्यम से इन विचारों का धरातल तक, जमीनी स्तर तक इसकी पहुंच होगी। तो सुरेश जी, आभार सबका। थैंक यू सो मच, बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद आप सभी का।